James Carter had spent years building Carter Auto Group into a household name. What had started as a single lot with a handful of cars had grown into a successful network of dealerships across the state. He prided himself on offering fair deals and excellent customer service. But lately, whispers of complaints had reached him, stories of pushy salespeople, dishonest pricing, and customers walking away feeling disrespected. James couldn't let that slide. He had always believed that the foundation of his business was trust, and if that was crumbling, he needed to see it for himself. Instead of relying on secondhand reports, he decided to go undercover at his flagship dealership, the one that bore his name. If there was a problem, he would find it. Dressing down in a worn hoodie, jeans, and an old baseball cap, James transformed himself into just another customer. To complete the disguise, he added a fake beard and a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. His usual confident, commanding presence was carefully muted. Today, he was an ordinary man looking for a car, nothing more. As soon as he stepped onto the lot, he could feel the change. Normally, when he visited his dealerships, employees scrambled to impress him. But today, he was invisible. He wandered the lot for a few minutes, taking in the selection of vehicles. He wanted to see who would approach him, how they would treat a customer who didn't look like an easy sale. It didn't take long. A salesman in his early 40s, dressed in a crisp button-up shirt and slacks, strode over with a well-rehearsed smile. "Hey there, looking for a new ride today?" His name tag read, Rick. James gave a small nod. "Yeah, just checking out what you got." Rick's eyes flickered over James's casual clothes and his smile thinned. James caught the subtle shift in attitude, less enthusiasm, less patience. Already he was seeing the cracks in his operation. He had come here for answers, and he was about to get them. Rick wasted no time steering James toward a gleaming, mid-sized sedan parked near the front of the lot. "This right here is one of our best sellers," he said, patting the hood like a proud owner. "Great gas mileage, smooth handling, top-of-the-line features. You won't find a better car in this price range." James ran his fingers along the door, taking in the details. It was a nice car, no doubt about it, but that wasn't what he was here to evaluate. He wanted to see how Rick handled the sale. "What's the price?" James asked, keeping his tone neutral. Rick gestured toward the sticker on the window. "This beauty is going for $32,999. A steal, if you ask me. You'll be driving off in style." James raised an eyebrow. "That's a little more than I was hoping to spend." Rick's smile twitched. For a fraction of a second, James saw the irritation in his eyes before he masked it with forced enthusiasm. "Well, you could check out our used lot, but honestly, you don't want to cheap out on something like this. You want a car that makes a statement, right? Something reliable, something you'll be proud of." James suppressed the urge to frown. He had trained his team to listen to customers, not pressure them. Dismissing a customer's budget wasn't just bad salesmanship. It was disrespectful. "Are you guys flexible on pricing?" James asked. Rick let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Sorry, buddy. We don't do the whole back and forth thing here. Our prices are set." That was a flat-out lie. Carter Auto Group had always allowed negotiation. In fact, James had personally approved policies ensuring that customers with reasonable offers could work out a deal. Yet here was one of his own salesmen shutting that door before the conversation even started. Before James could press further, his attention was drawn to a hushed conversation happening a few feet away. He glanced over and saw an older man and a teenage boy standing near a used sedan. The defeated look on the father's face made James pause. That was when he heard the words that made his stomach turn. James kept his gaze fixed on the two customers standing near the used sedan, their conversation just barely audible over the chatter of the sales lot. The older man, who looked to be in his late 40s, had deep lines of exhaustion carved into his face. His son, a lanky teenager with a backpack slung over one shoulder, stood beside him, shifting uncomfortably. "Dad, we need a car," the boy said quietly. His voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable note of desperation in it. "I need to get to school, and you to get to work." The father exhaled heavily and ran a hand over his face. "I know, son, I know. But this is the third dealership we've been to, and they all say the same thing. Our credit score isn't good enough for financing." James felt his jaw tighten. He had heard stories like this before, too many of them. Good, hardworking people who just needed a break, but instead, they were being turned away like they weren't worth the trouble. Maybe they'll work something out, the teenager said, hopeful but hesitant. The father shook his head. I doubt it. The last place we went to made us feel like dirt. The salesman laughed when I asked about payment plans. I don't want to go through that again. James clenched his fists. His company had policies in place specifically to help people like this. Flexible financing options, second chance credit programs, and trade-in incentives designed to make car ownership possible for families struggling financially. Yet here was a customer who had been to 3 dealerships, and not one of them had given him a real chance. Before James could step in, another salesman, this one younger, maybe in his early 30s, approached the father and son. His name tag read Kyle. Hey there, folks, Kyle greeted them with an easy smile. Looking at this sedan, it's a solid choice, low mileage, great condition. The father hesitated before speaking. It's in our budget, but I don't know if we'll qualify for financing. Our credit isn't great. Kyle's smile faltered, but only for a second. I hear you, he said, nodding, but we've got options. Let's sit down and see what we can do. We work with a few lenders who specialize in second chance financing. James watched closely. Kyle's approach was a stark contrast to Rick's. He wasn't pushing, and he wasn't brushing the customer off. He was listening. The father still looked uncertain. I just don't want to waste anyone's time. No worries, Kyle assured him. You're not wasting anyone's time. My job is to help you find something that works. James felt a glimmer of relief. At least one of his employees was doing things the right way. But at the same time, the fact that customers like this father had been turned away from other dealerships, possibly even his own, made his stomach turn. Rick, who had been standing beside James, scoffed quietly. Waste of time, he muttered under his breath. James turned to him, his expression unreadable. What did you say? Rick shrugged. Just saying, guys like that never qualify. No point in dragging it out. James's stomach churned. It was one thing to suspect bad business practices. It was another to hear it firsthand. He had seen enough. It was time to make some changes, starting now. James took a deep breath, his blood simmering beneath the surface. Rick's dismissive attitude was exactly the kind of behavior he had feared was happening at his dealership. But hearing it in person, watching it unfold right in front of him, made his decision crystal clear. It was time to step in. He turned to Rick and locked eyes with him. You think that family is a waste of time? Rick blinked, taken aback by the directness of the question. He let out a small, uncomfortable chuckle. I mean, yeah, guys like that, low credit, probably no money down. They're not walking out of here with a car today, so what's the point? James fought to keep his composure. He had spent years building a company that prided itself on giving people a fair shot, and here was one of his own employees treating customers like numbers on a balance sheet. He decided right then that it was time to end the charade. I'll take the sedan, James said suddenly, his voice firm. Rick's eyes widened, his entire demeanor shifting. Really? Great choice, man. He clapped James on the shoulder and turned toward the showroom. Let's get the paperwork started. James followed him inside, weaving through rows of desks and salespeople. He could see Kyle sitting down with the father and son, taking the time to go over financing options. That was the kind of service he expected. That was how his business was supposed to operate. Rick led James to a desk and grabbed a stack of forms. All right, let's get some details. What kind of financing are you thinking? James pulled off his cap, yanked off the fake beard, and sat up straight. Rick froze. His eyes widened in horror as recognition dawned. Mr. Carter? His voice cracked. I didn't recognize you. James folded his hands on the desk, his expression unreadable. That's the point, Rick. The color drained from Rick's face. Around them, other employees started whispering as they noticed the CEO of Carter Auto Group sitting in the middle of the sales floor. The energy in the room shifted instantly. James let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again. Tell me, Rick, do you always lie to customers about our pricing policies? Do you always turn away families who need help? Or was today just a special occasion? Rick swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the stack of papers. I didn't mean anything by it. It's just, you know how it is, Mr. Carter. We got to focus on the customers who can actually buy, right? The ones who James held up a hand, cutting him off. No, Rick, that's not how it is. That's not how it has ever been. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with disappointment. And if you think that's the way we run things here, then you don't belong in this dealership. Rick's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Wait, Mr. Carter. James stood up. Bring everyone into the conference room. Now. The weight of his words hung in the air. Employees scrambled, customers looked on curiously, and Rick paled even further. James wasn't just going to fix what was broken. He was about to rebuild his dealership from the ground up. Within minutes, the entire sales team had gathered in the conference room. The air was thick with tension. Some employees whispered nervously to each other, while others sat rigidly, waiting for whatever was coming next. James stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Rick sat near the back, slumped in his chair, his face pale. He knew he was in trouble. He just didn't know how bad it was going to be. James took a slow breath before speaking. I built this company on trust, honesty, and respect. From day one, my goal was to make sure that every customer who walked onto one of our lots was treated fairly, whether they were buying a brand new luxury model or a used car with high mileage. His gaze swept across the room. No one spoke, no one dared. But today, he continued, his voice cool but firm, I watched as one of my own employees lied to a customer about our pricing policies. I listened as a struggling father was dismissed as a waste of time. I saw an attitude that does not belong in my business. A few of the employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Rick, who had shrunk lower and lower, finally raised his head. Mr. Carter, You had your chance, James cut him off, his tone final, and you made it clear how you feel about customers who don't meet your standards. He turned to the general manager, who had been sitting silently at the side of the room, unsure of what to do. Rick is done here, effective immediately. Rick's face turned red. Come on, Mr. Carter. You don't have to do this. I'm one of your best salesmen. You were, James corrected. But I don't care how many cars you sell if you're doing it by lying and turning away good people. That's not how we do business. Silence filled the room as two security guards stepped in. Rick's mouth opened as if he wanted to argue, but he seemed to think better of it. With a defeated sigh, he stood up, straightened his shirt, and walked out. The door shut behind him, leaving behind an unmistakable tension. James exhaled slowly before turning back to the rest of the staff. Now, for the rest of you, if you think for a second that I don't notice how you treat customers, you're wrong. Every person who steps onto this lot deserves respect. Whether they have perfect credit or bad credit, whether they're buying a brand new SUV or an older model that's all they can afford. That's what I expect from each and every one of you. He paused, letting his words sink in. Starting today, we're making changes. I'm bringing in additional training on customer service and ethical sales practices. Every employee will be retrained, no exceptions. And if I hear about another customer being lied to, turned away, or treated like they're not worth your time. He let his gaze sweep over the room again. Then you won't be working here. A few heads nodded, others stared at the floor. But Kyle, the young salesman who had treated the father and son with kindness, straightened his shoulders. Mr. Carter, he said, I just want you to know that some of us do care. We try to do things the right way. James nodded, his expression softening just slightly. I know, Kyle, and I appreciate that. People like you are the reason this company is still standing. He glanced at his watch. Meeting's over. Get back to work. As the employees filed out of the room, James followed, stepping onto the showroom floor just as the father and son were finalizing their paperwork with Kyle. The father's face lit up when he saw him. Mr. Carter? He asked hesitantly. As in, the Carter? James smiled and extended his hand. That's me. And I just want to say, I appreciate your business. We're lucky to have customers like you. The man shook his hand, looking both surprised and grateful. I thought for sure we'd be turned away again. Not today, James said firmly, and not ever again. As he watched Kyle finish the deal, James felt a sense of satisfaction settle over him. There was still work to do, but one thing was certain, his dealership would never be the same. And that was exactly how he wanted it.